Welcome, and so great to be back after taking a little break for the month of September. I'm glad you tuned in. This is Tim Austin, and this is Navigate Podcast. You're in for a great conversation today with my guest, who I'm going to introduce in just a moment. But first, I want to let you know about a great opportunity to get some tools, resources, and encouragement to help you on your transitions journey. Join me for my free Tools for Transitions webinar. I schedule these webinars multiple times throughout the year. It's 1 hour, and you can see, if you go onto my website, you can see when the next one is, and you can register for that. Very easy process. So go on to encompasslifecoaching.com and register for my next Tools for Transitions workshop. From time to time on Navigate, we give our listeners a peek into someone's transition story, how that impacted them, some life lessons they learned, some takeaways. And I absolutely love this part, introducing another guide for you on your journey. So that is what we get to do today in this conversation with my guest, Dr. Ali Butrous. Relinquishing our plans in exchange for God's greater plans and purposes can feel risky and uncomfortable, but it truly is the path to our best life, the one God designs for us. Dr. Ali loves to teach people how they can thrive in their life, their thoughts, emotions, and relationships. In order to learn how to better serve others in this way, she earned a master's in psychology from Pepperdine University and a doctorate in clinical psychology from Biola University. Dr. Ali has over 10 years of experience in the field of mental health, including providing services in mental health treatment centers for children and teens, university and church counseling centers, and a hospital psychiatric department. In 2018, Ali and her husband Jeremy started a business called Radiant Thoughts, which offers consulting, life coaching, publishing, and ghostwriting services. Dr. Ali has ghostwritten several Christian books, and she and her husband Jeremy co-wrote The Ways of Prosperity, which was published by Thomas Nelson in 2020. The book topped Amazon rankings for new releases in Christian counseling that year, and their second book, Learning How to Love, has been released as of this summer, July 14th. So Dr. Ali co-hosts 2 podcasts and an online teaching platform with Jeremy. She also hosts Tuesday Talks, a podcast focused on sharing tips for emotional and relational thriving. In their free time, Jeremy and Ali love traveling the world and have been to over 50 countries so far. So thanks again for listening in, and let's get to know Dr. Ali Butrous as she shares her story. Well, Dr. Ali, welcome to Navigate Podcast. So great to have you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Tim. I'm really excited to be here today.
Yeah, I was interested kind of from day one to have you on the show after we kind of started collaborating a little bit in the coaching area. On some things, and started getting more curious about what would it look like to have Dr. Ali Butrous on the show. And here we are with you joining me. So good day today.
Yeah, it's been really fun to get to know you as well. We have a lot of kind of common interests in like travel and obviously the coaching world and trying to help people live their best life.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. Yeah, this podcast, as anyone who's listened before knows, is a lot about navigating transition in some form or fashion. And that is the kind of the theme that runs throughout this podcast. And I suspect today we're going to hear a bit of your transition story and some of the ways you've had to navigate change and transition and some of the challenges around that. And there's a lot of ways we experience transition. Some transitions are unplanned and we know, or reactive. I call them rug pulled out transitions, where they're just those big shockers that come our way and we have to react in some way and respond to that. And then there's the more intentional, planned transitions, which are, at least for the most part, we have some say in the matter and some choice in that.
Yeah.
At least we are trusting that God knows what he's doing in those transitions.
Yeah.
And then I also like to refer to what I call kind of an internal transitions, where nothing necessarily is happening in terms of outward circumstances. Nothing big is maybe changing around us externally, but or it could be kind of a precursor to some outward change, but something's going on inside. So for the sake of equipping and encouraging our listeners today, and for them to get to know Dr. Ali Butrous at a deeper level, I'm going to let you choose what type of transition you'd like to talk about. It can be a blend of any of those that I mentioned. And we can unpack as much as you'd like today. But just share your story a little bit. Why don't you first give us, our listeners, just a brief sketch of who you are and what you do?
Yeah. And I love that, by the way, that kind of breakdown of the different transitions, because I think those kinds of tools are so helpful for us to even just like give a name to what we're going through. So thank you for that. I think that's a great tool to use. So I work mostly as a consultant and also as a life coach. Probably 10 to 15 hours a week I devote towards life coaching, and I really love it. I love helping people become the best version of themselves. That sense of renewing the mind, I think, is so powerful. And yet I find in the church sometimes we don't really know how to encapsulate that process, how to move that needle forward, how to actually change our thoughts. It's like, well, let me just have the mind of Christ. And that's good. But what does that look like? And how do we know when we have it or when we don't? And so a lot of my life coaching, I work with Christians and non-Christians, helping them to really upgrade their thinking, to really upgrade their communication, and to know what they can do practically. To not leave it as a guessing game, or just like, my favorite thing at the church, people say, well, just be more loving to people. And you're like, that's great. But 1 Corinthians 13 tells us specific ways we love and specific things to do. And then even within those, we can break it down so much further with specifics so that we don't feel like, we just hope it works. We cultivate maybe a feeling of love and we hope that translates into love, so I love the specifics. I went to Pepperdine to get a master's in psychology, and then Biola to get a doctorate in psychology for this very reason, because I wanted to know the practical ways that we can learn to live out the gospel and to demonstrate the gospel and to really see tangible, trackable progress in our growth. So I'm all about that. I love it. My husband and I also write books together. So we've written a couple books and we host podcasts, and we can talk a little bit more about those a little bit later. But we're very busy and we really enjoy the variety in life.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And I, by the way, as you were mentioning your role as a life coach, I got to hop on to one of your podcast episodes, and you did a really good job on this. And I don't remember the exact title, but I'm sure our listeners can search for it. But it was really just you laid out the unique characteristics of counseling and coaching, different types of counselors and therapists, and you really did a great job, I think, unpacking that for your listeners. And so I would encourage our listeners to check that out as well. But like you said, you'll give some more information toward the end of our conversation today, which will be good for people. So stay tuned for that as we move along here. But yeah, well, I love that part about renewing your mind. It's such a big piece in moving forward, and coaching specifically is about forward movement and looking ahead, what could be. And we get stuck in the past. That's where, often we can stay without a real focus without that mind shift, without that renewing of the mind, it's easy to get stuck. And
totally.
So I love that you have that focus. I'd love for you to share your story around a significant transition or pivot, either in your career or personal life.
Yeah, I would say that my biggest transition by far, people could say grad school or all these different things, living abroad, but I would say by far my biggest transition was a planned and intentional transition. And it was both professional and personal, because it involved meeting my husband and deciding to get married. And then we started a business and all of this even before that. So I would say that's definitely my biggest all-encompassing transition.
And how long ago was that, Ali?
So that was a little over about 4.5 years ago
Okay.
that we first met. Yeah.
Okay. And obviously you mentioned, I'm always curious what triggers a transition. And obviously you mentioned a relationship and
Yeah.
you're married now. What were some other triggers around that season of transition for you?
Well, I mean, I was probably one of the most independent women that I knew at the time.
Okay.
Before I met my husband, I was, my family had kind of resigned to the fact that I wouldn't probably ever get married. I was very ambitious.
Mm.
I had a really hard time in my teens. So it, people can look back at their life and think of it in many ways, but I do take the really kind of coaching perspective of what did I learn from that? Because I was diagnosed with depression, very severe depression. I was diagnosed with PTSD. I had a lot of trauma I was working through. And I think looking back, that gave me a lot of empathy for people, a lot of compassion for people who are struggling, which I think is one of my strengths now. And it also made me into a person that said at some point, I kind of put my foot down and I said, I don't want to live life like a victim. I don't want to live in a negative space. And what do I need to do to get there? And as I started to learn things, I started to take those steps that were really empowering and freeing, focusing on the future. Like, okay, what do I want to build? How can I build something different? How can I build something that I enjoy? And through that process, I got a lot of confidence because I saw it work as I embraced very practical skill sets and ideas. And I was like, wow, this is amazing. And so my life plan was to get my doctorate and when I met my husband, I was in my third year, I believe, of a 5-year program for my doctorate. So I was just like, well, I'm going to get my doctorate. I'm going to move to the East Coast and I'm originally from California, born and raised. I'm going to move to the East Coast and where my brother lives because he has a heart for adoption. I'm going to adopt and foster kids and I'll have, him and his family as my support system.
Yeah.
And I'm going to go into private practice as a therapist. And I had it all planned out. Like I was a planner. I was confident in my planning skills. I was excited for my plan. It felt really good to me. And that's kind of the point at which, of course, God came in and he's like, well, surprise, I have other plans for you.
Yeah. So talk to our planners just for a moment here. So my wife's a big planner. I've learned a lot from her and I've needed to in terms of planning more intentionally. But talk to our planners here. When transition comes along, it tends to place demands on us at times. It sounds like it placed a demand on you to reconsider what your plan was and how that matched up to God's plan. How did you struggle with that? What was some of the debate going on internally?
Yeah, I think it's so helpful to have plans, but again, it can be such a liability at times when we're not willing to hold them loosely. And I think for me, I, initially held so rigidly to the plan, so inflexibly, I'd date different people, but I would end up at the end of the day saying, I like my plan better, than having to give up my elements of my plan. For a relationship, I was going to grad school full-time and working full-time, which everyone said was impossible in my program. But I'd work weekends, I'd work evenings because I loved helping people. Yeah. And I got so much joy from that to think of giving that up to do in my mind, mundane work of cultivating a relationship and going on dates just for the sake of, I was my family, they're all workaholics. My grandfather worked for NASA, worked in the test floor at Intel. My grandma was a real estate mogul in Los Angeles. And so I knew how to work hard. Yeah. And I knew how to gain a sense of identity from that, but I had to be willing to then actually say, I'll give up my work, part of my work and my career, which I was doing well in and had great connections, to slow down and facilitate a relational connection that's not goal oriented, and to be willing to give up my dreams of the life that I created in my mind that in some ways I still felt a pull towards. I still felt like even when I met Jeremy, I knew God was in it.
Yeah.
I could sense that he was in it. I could see how God had aligned us. We worked really well together. We communicated really well together. We had a really easy relationship because of the tools that we'd cultivated individually. And because, I think I was very logical about the relational process. And then I met him and I kind of checked in with my emotions and I said, this is good for me. Yeah. Actually, emotionally, I'm doing really well now. And I didn't expect that. So I really had to shift my thinking and be open to let go of my plan and to say, God, what do you have here? And to really spend the time questioning him, because I was like, God, I'm here to serve you. To me, it sounds like fostering and adopting is more holy and servant like minded than starting a business with my husband, Jeremy, starting a business and writing books together and working on media projects together and doing consulting together. I was like, I think my plan is more spiritual, God, Yeah. It's like a little more self-sacrificial, it sounds like, than writing books. But I really had to open my mind to see his vision and the possibilities that he had and the joy and the reward, and to recognize that sometimes I have judged things to be better for me, or for serving God even. Yeah. Then God himself has judged. And he says, no, I have a different plan for you. And I value that plan. And I want you to engage in that plan and to allow yourself to be excited about this relationship and allow yourself to be excited about the things that I have for you in media and in writing books together.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's quite a struggle in releasing control over your plans into God's hands and let him design or at least partner with him to design your best life, right?
Yeah. And to have his value system for my life, because I think I really devalued. I thought, relationship just, it takes time and energy and it'll slow me down. That was like the opposite of many of the people that I've met in life that are like, I just want to get married. I was like, that takes work and time, guys. Come on. I'll just do my thing. But God's like, no, I have more to show you and more to demonstrate to the world through you and through your relationship. That's actually means more than your ideas of your plans.
That's good. So what, in terms of the fulfillment of that, of God saying, I have more to show you, I have more to, through you and your relationship with Jeremy to demonstrate to the world, how has some of that been fulfilled at this point? Obviously, it's a journey, it's a process, but up to this point, what are some things that, you can say, wow, I gave this up, but it's in comparison, it's nothing in light of what God has done.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you kind of mentioned initially my plan, it was very hard for me to recognize the fullness of, in my mind, I'd created like a plan that came to fruition, even though I knew it was going to take 5 to 10 years, or, I was going to buy a house. Like, this is the plan and this is the fruit that I imagined. And right. Recognizing that was a vain imagination, even though it was a good one. And even though it wasn't bad, that was vain. And so now, actually living in this relationship, I mean, we travel and we are together nonstop. We consult ministries and nonprofits and authors and speakers together. We work together. We are literally together almost 24/7, working and living. And we've been surprised and also blessed in some ways that, I mentioned we both came into the relationship a little bit later than maybe some of our peers. And we had the time to cultivate our own emotional regulation process. Like what do you do when you get stressed? How do you manage that effectively? And we both really pursued those skills. And how do you process your feelings? And how do you process even for me, process grieving the loss of my plan.
Okay.
In a healthy way, because I think, most people would look and say, this relationship is so wonderful. You guys are so good together. It should all be happy. But every transition has so much loss in it that even if it's, because we're getting an upgrade, we have to take the time to grieve that and to really be aware of how that's affecting us, to really, for me, it felt like I had to be thankful to my former self for all the plans that she had tried to create and that was good, like have gratitude and say, that was amazing that you did that. That got you where you are, that got you really invested in skills. And then I also had to say, here's the hope for the future now together that shifted, and to kind of say, I'm glad that you were, and I'm glad you thought the way that you did. I'm glad that got you so far. And now here's the hope for where we can go in the future. Yeah. But in terms of Jeremy and myself, like the people that we spend time with, it's been amazing, the feedback that they get, that they've never seen a relationship like ours. And people that have, lost hope in relationships themselves, people who have seen their parents maybe go through a really, really hard relationship, or just haven't seen couples communicate and really enjoy each other. And really try to see their spouse with all of the giftings that God has put in them, and really try to cultivate those and pull them out of each other, like pull out the best things, as opposed to pull out like, any weaknesses or senses of frustration. And really what it's come down to, and Jeremy and I, we have conversations sometimes and people end up listening in, and we just kind of talk about different ideas in relationship. And that became our latest resource that comes out at the end of the month, actually, of July, called Learning How to Love. And it's based on this idea that if we don't take full ownership, our relationships aren't going to be able to fully thrive. And I think that's what we came in with, this sense of, I'm going to own every reaction and every emotion that I have, even if I think you triggered it. Right. Because most people in relationships say, you made me feel this way. You made me feel bad about myself. You made me feel not good enough. You made me feel, whatever. And we, at that point, we would stop with ourselves and say, I am feeling this way. I wonder what I need. And then if I can communicate what I need, instead of blaming someone else for doing something and making me feel a certain way. Because none of us, like, I don't like it if someone says, you made me feel bad. I don't want to make you feel bad. So I'm going to get defensive if you tell me I made you feel bad. I didn't mean to, and a lot of times in a relationship, that's how it goes. So this idea of being open to your partner, anyone you're in relationship with, really open to them being different, and that's open to their different ideas, and open to them being fully who they are, and open to empowering them. And then also being the full owner of everything you bring into the relationship or don't bring as well. Good. And so our relationship has been so multifaceted in that we create resources, we do ghostwriting, and we're able to bring these ideas that we've conversed about in our life 24/7 being together, and try to offer an upgraded kind of fleshed out perspective to people, and offer words and tools. And really that would have only happened within a relationship. I thought about writing a book, but I would never have done it. And Jeremy comes from a background of working with ministries and authors and speakers. And he's like, let's just write books. Let's just write some more books. And I'm like, isn't that hard? Like, shouldn't that be really hard? And he's like, I know how to do that. And I'm like, well, I know how to have conversations about, upgraded communication and relational processes. So, okay.
Right. Yeah. And I love the way, from what I've listened to so far in your podcast, how you bring that combination of, your background in therapy and counseling, and coaching, and with Jeremy's, some maybe a more focus on the theological perspective and some of that, and just how you guys bring that combination together. Like, I can see, I love how you how you worded that, when you're getting an upgrade, and you guys definitely, seem to have gotten an upgrade in terms of just being together and the ministry and the work and then the relationship. But like you said, you still, even when you're trading in for something better, you still have to grieve the losses that were there. And I really appreciate that you mentioned that, because, we can really be excited and looking forward to a transition that's coming our way, and get into the planning mode and the expectations, and have a lot of hope around the future. But are we forgetting that, well, maybe there's people we're leaving behind in this past season that we need to bring good closure with? Maybe there's some relationships that need to be mended or reconciled, or maybe there's just my own personal sense of loss. I need to work through that. But I just appreciate that you mentioned that. That's so true. Grieving the losses, whether it's a good or difficult and challenging transition.
Yeah. And watching, I think too, the way that we talk to ourselves about it, and in those moments where we're maybe feeling tense or struggling, I found, like, for me, I had to really pause and dissect, what was I telling myself about it, because I developed so many thoughts that were helpful for me when I was working, 100 hours a week. And those thoughts really helped, but they didn't help once you're in a relationship. And you don't even realize sometimes how you're saying, oh, I should be getting back to work, or, oh, I have so much to do. And it's like, no, right now you don't have anything else to do. Right now you're just being, and you're relating, and that's enough, but I really had to sort through individual thought patterns and say, is this helpful for my season, or is this hurting my season right now? Because it's causing me to bring a tense self into this moment.
Yeah. Yeah. And I wonder if some of that goes to being just by nature and by the work we do, if you're very productive, task oriented, and like to check the boxes and get things done, then when we shift to focus on a relationship, it's hard for us to measure results at times, like
absolutely
we have been able to do. And like, I don't know, I'm just wondering if some of that was there too for you. I know it is for me. And like, I love to check the boxes and get things done, and I can measure that. Little bit trickier, I guess, to measure what are the results of spending time with this person, and what is the impact in that area. There's a lot of greater measure of trust there, faith there, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's funny you mentioned that too, because my family and close friends, their comment was, well, you seem more like relational and settled, and I'm like, that's true. And realizing, like, to God, that's a huge part of his plan, is that we learn how to relate well to people. And, I think I did a good job of that, but I think being with Jeremy 24/7 as well, and spending so much time together, is also part of how that side of me has been really developed in a more nuanced and complex way.
Yeah, good. You've probably mentioned some of this already, but maybe you might have some advice for someone in this kind of season where it requires a bit of reinventing ourselves. Maybe a particular kind of certain transition season is happening in someone's life where you have to rethink and reinvent. And in terms of maybe the lifestyle and the work and ministry we do, is there any advice for someone that you would have in this kind of season where there's some, which necessitates some kind of reinventing?
Yeah, I think the biggest tool that I used was trying to stay curious. I think
stay curious.
To stay curious. I think for us planners, especially, we lose a curiosity because we think we know what we need, or we think we know the right thing. But to kind of put those judgments, Jeremy and I call it suspending judgment, like finding that space where you can move judgment to the side and say, ask yourself questions. Like, I'm curious what I need to develop in this new season.
It's good.
I'm curious what I need to let go of. I'm curious what's serving me right now and what's not serving me right now. Like I mentioned about my own thoughts, of what I needed to be doing, what the toxic shoulds that we don't even know we have until we're in a season where we realize they're really not helping. So I think maintaining a posture of openness and curiosity to both the things that you are being empowered by God to let go of, and the things that you're dying to, even if you didn't expect you die to them. Like me, I didn't know that it was going to be such a big deal for me to die to full control over my finances. Like for me, as being single and living on my own in LA, like I thought I had my finances on wrap. Like I had it figured out and I had a plan. And Jeremy has a different approach and a better approach in many ways. And yet it was just different to have to talk to someone about it instead of like just saying like, here's what I'm going to do. It doesn't work well in relationships when you say, here's what I'm going to do.
Yeah, here's right.
Good luck, So being curious to learn new ways to develop yourself, to find parts of yourself God has put in you that you didn't even know about. And then I think another huge tool is self-talk. I, as many people who are planners as well, I found I had some challenging self-talk at sometimes, where I wasn't always the nicest to myself. I was very hard on myself. I was very, very much an achiever. And with that, I had to really, really watch how I was talking to myself about myself in the relationship, about Jeremy, just these things we don't even know we're telling ourselves, or we're thinking sometimes like, oh, you're not good enough in this way, or, oh, he doesn't understand you. It's like, well, wait a second. Let's just pause and let's challenge that for a second. Let's suspend that judgment.
Yeah.
How do you know he doesn't understand? Okay. Maybe there are some things he said or did that you don't understand. And that's why you're feeling misunderstood. Oh, geez. Now it comes back to me owning this.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I assumed he didn't understand me, but I probably don't understand him either. And so how can I make this judgment? How can I resolve this? Because that resolution is so important. So, okay, I guess I just need to share with him that I feel misunderstood and see what he's experiencing and not assume that I know. Right. And all of that is so subtle in our process. Like we don't even know we're thinking that half the time. We just get angry and we don't know why, or we get frustrated, or we get, sad, or we withdraw, or whatever it is that we all have our own methods of what to do when we feel misunderstood, or, when we feel a divide in the relationship or a disconnection. And so really being careful to know that my self-talk isn't naturally one way. My self-talk is a tool that I cultivate to serve the relationship. And if it's not serving health in the relationship, then I really need to take more ownership of it so that it helps resolve things, and it's an asset to me instead of a liability.
Yeah. And sometimes, like you said, it just takes a quick kind of catching where we're going with that and pausing, asking ourselves, what's going on here? Where's this thinking leading? And that's good. That to me, I mean, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I think the fruit of our self-talk becomes really apparent in the relationship. Even if the self-talk was something like, oh, I wonder what life would have been like if I chose to continue with my plan. It's like, well, the fruit of that is going to show up in the way I interact, right? In the way that I show up in the relationship if my heart isn't in a healthy place and I'm revisiting these things, right? So the fruit of your self-talk can bring life or destruction to your relationship.
So good. So true. Yeah. I think for those who are navigating big changes, transitions that are hard, where there's regrets maybe around some of the things they're leaving behind. I know that I had to face this head on after a big transition season 5 or 6 years ago that I went through. I did find myself at times beating myself up over, I should have done this. I could have done this differently. And I think for people in transition, there's that self-talk where often comes in the form of, regrets. And yet when we stop and pause and say, okay, where is God in this? Who is God in this? And
Yes.
what does he have to say? And what does he want to do in terms of the renewing of my thinking around this and my own, personal self-talk? It's such a exercise in humility too, I think. This whole area of when you said staying curious, that word humility popped into my mind. Just, you've got to have a degree of humility and surrender to stay curious and to have that growth mindset. What can I learn here? What is the growth opportunity in this?
Yeah. And to know that, God is the ultimate expert on you.
Yeah.
We are, more experts on ourselves than anybody else on the earth because we live with ourselves 24/7. That's kind of my philosophy and approach, especially in coaching. I'm like, I'm just the coach. You're the expert. Help, show up with what you know about yourself. And I'm going to help you in every way that I can to upgrade a process or whatever.
You bet.
I think it's really, really toxic when people in the church or even sometimes in therapy will say like, no, I know what you need better than you know. I know who you are better than you know. I don't think it's always the most helpful, but God is the ultimate expert. And for us to say, there may be things that you have put in me and ways that you have made me that I haven't experienced yet in my life because I'm still walking through my life.
That's good.
And I'm going to be willing to hear from you what those are and to hear from you how you want to bring those out and cultivate those in this season.
Good. Yeah. I love that. Such a journey of growth and possibility when we surrender to that.
Yeah. And I love what you said too. I think in inviting God's voice into that self-talk conversation, I would just encourage every listener to kind of think about that because so many times God is there saying, hey, it's okay. And I know you feel bad. And I know this thing didn't work out the way that you planned.
Yeah.
And I know that that's hard for you. And that's okay. It doesn't have to not be hard. I also love you so much. I want you to think thoughts that bring life to you, that bring life to the people around you, that bring life and power to your future instead of disempowering it. And I think just that process of hearing his voice in that way helps with both the recognition of the truth of what's going on, the grieving of the loss, the acknowledgement of our sin and the acknowledgement of our weakness, and also his upgrade for our future.
Good. Yeah. Because we're allowing him to speak his interpretation into that rather than our own, right?
Exactly.
Good. I love that. Great. Well, maybe one or two more questions before we get ready to wrap up here. But I was going to ask you, what are some non-negotiables for you in terms of rhythms and routines? You guys move around a lot in the work and the ministry that you do. Rhythms and routines can be difficult to maintain and sustain through a lot of movement. But what are some non-negotiables for you? A couple rhythms and routines that don't change even through volatile or turbulent times or just a lot of change?
Yeah, I think in a very practical way for myself, I found that exercise is one of the most essential things I can do. It seems very cliched. Everyone says it and it's like, oh yeah, here we go again. But it does, the research really shows how much it does for our mind, for our clarity, for our body, for our overall health.
Good.
And so that's one thing I will not compromise on. And even Jeremy knows now, he's like, did you get your 10,000 steps in or do we need to go for a walk tonight? And I've seen the tangible effect on my mood if I'm consistently moving around and exercising than if I'm not.
Yeah.
So that for me, it's like, that's part of my hardwiring. I don't go a day without, getting at least 10,000 steps and some decent exercise in. And then I think relationally for me as well, because Jeremy and I spend so much time together, having coffee together, it sounds like a little thing, but like having coffee together and just sitting and being together with our coffee in the morning is very grounding and connecting, and gives us that space before we jump into things, business and work conversations and logistics and all of that, where we can really focus on being together and enjoying each other and sharing information or things that we've had in different interactions or, whatever. And I think that has been essential, because I think when couples run a business together, there's a extra strain for many people in terms of, when are we together as husband and wife, and when are we together as business partners?
Yeah.
And making sure we keep those two categories equally nourished and connected, I think is a non-negotiable for us as well.
So are you saying there's some boundaries there? So when you sit down for coffee in the morning, there's some things that are off the table as far as what you can talk about? Or
I mean, I wouldn't say we make a very rigid boundary necessarily. Like if something comes up, we will talk about it, but it's more the intention that each and every day we take time to kind of turn off the part of our brain that's focused on doing and turn on the part of our brain that's like focused on being together and valuing and building up each other and encouraging each other, and having time where we do things that are playful or fun, or we love to go to theme parks together. We love to travel and just sightsee. And so doing those kinds of activities, having that time in the morning where we're first connecting, and then really making that a priority to connect at any time that we can through the day as well.
Yeah. Good. Love it. Talk to us specifically about some of the resources that you and Jeremy are working on now, and how someone can connect with you.
Yeah. So the best way to connect is through our website, radiantthoughts.com. You can reach out through that with any kind of inquiry or question. There's a place to connect there. And there we also have all of the other projects we're working on. So we have a podcast, as we've discussed. It's actually 4 podcasts in one, because my husband's very ambitious. Yeah. So we have The Ways of Prosperity, which was actually a book that's also been published by HarperCollins Thomas Nelson. And it's about God's idea of prosperity and how that's different from man's idea. And it really focuses on relational prosperity, financial comes in there, but also how do we prosper in our emotions? How do we prosper in our thoughts? And really, how do we prosper in our soul? We read in scripture that we need to be aware of, like, not just our faith prospering, but our soul prospering. And so how do we do that? And so we have that as a book you can find on Amazon. And that's what our first podcast is about. As you mentioned, Jeremy takes the theology side because he's really developed an expertise in that area. And I add the kind of practical psychology. And then I have Tuesday talks. So if you're interested in growing and bettering your thoughts, bettering your self-talk, I even have a little series that I went through there on how to increase hope, how to shift your mindset to be more compassionate towards yourself, because all the research really shows that you're a much better, kinder person, and actually a person who imitates Christ more if you have a kind process with yourself that is empowering instead of tearing you down. So I talk a lot about that, but it's really about psychology. And then Jeremy has one that's theology based about the church. And then we have one on travel. We also have a travel YouTube channel. If you want to check that out, it's Jeremy and Dr. Ali Butrous, where we share some of our travel adventures. I believe God is found in culture and in the world. And it's such a joy to discover him through different places, different like geographical kind of locations, and see his creativity. And I think it really honors him when we do that. So we have that as well. And then we also have our new book, which I mentioned, Learning How to Love.
Coming out in just another week or two.
Yeah, we're so excited to share it because we have seen these skills and ideas really help relationships in our personal life, the people that we've shared them with, as well as through my coaching. And it's really the best I have to offer in terms of how to improve any relationship. And it's something that we can all take ownership of and do, and we don't have to wait, and we don't have to look and see, man, I wish this person would do that. But this resource, I think, really empowers people to say, what can I do? And oh my gosh, I can make it better by how I show up and how I react and what I expect. Like, wow. So we're really excited about that. And we love to hear from anyone. You know, I give out my email freely. So if anyone wants to reach out or get more resources, I'm happy to share them. Allie@radiantthoughts.com is my email. So feel free to reach out.
Great. Well, I will, and I will add these resources and your contact info for our listeners in our show notes, so they can find you there as well. You guys, you and Jeremy, Allie, are just bringing so much to the world. I love what you said about, you know, connecting with God through culture. And I know a lot of our listeners can resonate with that. A lot of our listeners live and work cross-culturally. And so, and have connected with God on that level as they've experienced God in other ways, in other contexts, and other cultures. And so love this conversation, and thank you so much for agreeing to join me today and for sharing a bit of your story. Thanks, Dr. Allie. Appreciate your time today.
Thank you so much, Tim. I just love the work that you're doing and the heart behind it. So it's really been an honor to connect more with you today and to be on here. So thank you so much.
Letting go, relinquishing, is a necessary part of navigating transition seasons. And we have to do this in order to embrace the new that God has for us. Transition has a way of placing demands on us to be more open and welcoming to the change. Dr. Allie has shared some of those areas she needed to surrender, her own personal plans and ambitions, in order to create space for new thoughts and approaches to life. If you're wrestling with God's invitation to let go and let Him partner with you to design your best life, I'd love to hear your story and talk about how a season of transitions coaching can help you get the confidence and clarity you need to move forward. Schedule a discovery call with me at encompasslifecoaching.com to learn more. Just as we wrap up today, I'd like to ask a favor of you. Building momentum is critical to growing a podcast, and we get that momentum by getting feedback from listeners like yourself. So if you've enjoyed the content on Navigate, would you help us move forward by giving us a quick review? That would really, really be helpful. So again, thanks for joining me for this episode of Navigate, and I will catch you next time.